Welcome to the module Understanding and Responding to Social Incidents, part of the series Capability Builders for Site-Based Social Performance Management Systems. My name is Dr. Anthony Kung. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining within the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland. This module is about understanding and responding to social incidents. Effective social performance requires sites to monitor social risks and incidents and investigate incidents when they arise. In a social performance management system, monitoring and investigating social incidents is most relevant to the check phase of the plan, do, check, act cycle. Understanding and responding to social incidents is a core social performance function. Previous work by staff at the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining indicates that social incidents can have high stakes not only for communities but also for companies. Having processes to manage social incidents is also part of having a human rights due diligence process, as described in the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, also known as the UNGPs. This module has three parts. Firstly, we'll define social incidents and describe how social incidents relate to social risk, social impact assessment, and grievance mechanisms. Next, we'll talk about steps in investigating and monitoring social incidents. And finally, we'll talk about the challenges of screening in social incidents to risk management processes. A social incident is an event or occurrence that can arise in a number of ways. Sometimes, individuals or groups from a local community can act to adversely affect a mining project. In other times, the mining project can act in ways to adversely affect communities. Or a third party can influence the relationship between a mining company and the community. The news article pictured here is an example of a social incident at Las Bambas mine in Peru. In this incident, a protest by community members escalated to physical violence. Social risk is a related concept to social incidents. A social risk is a potential incident. The word risk incorporates degrees of uncertainty and probability relating to future events, as opposed to incidents which relates to events or occurrences that have happened. A risk that eventuates leads to an incident. An incident can also create additional risks, which may or may not eventuate. For example, consider a situation where a civil society organization opposes a proposed mine expansion. You might identify the risk of protests as a result of the opposition. When opposition does eventuate, that risk becomes an incident. Other risks can arise, such as the risk of physical violence. If that eventuates, then a subsequent incident occurs, which of course can create further risks. You might have noticed that our definition of social incident overlaps with the definition of social impact discussed in another module. Social impacts, the ones that eventuate, are often also social incidents, especially when they affect local communities. But social incidents can happen even if they were not identified or anticipated in a social impact assessment. Social risk is a related concept to social incidents. A social risk is a potential incident. The word risk incorporates degrees of uncertainty and probability relating to future events, as opposed to incidents which relates to events or occurrences that have happened. A risk that eventuates leads to an incident. An incident can also create additional risks, which may or may not eventuate. This overlap in terminology can be confusing, and is a result of SIA and incident investigation having evolved from different origins. In practice, a robust social performance management system will allow them to feed into each other. The SIA can help sites anticipate potential social incidents or social risks, for example, and a social performance knowledge base can help incident investigations make sense of the causes and effects of an incident, as we'll discuss later. Grievances are also related to social incidents. A grievance is a complaint made by a community member or another stakeholder in relation to mining activities. Grievances can be raised in response to a social incident, and some people consider a grievance to constitute a social incident in and of itself. Processes for managing social incidents can include grievance mechanisms. For companies, grievance mechanisms are non-judicial and non-state based. That is, they are processes that allow stakeholders to communicate grievances to the company rather than to a court or other tribunal. Further information on grievance mechanisms can be found in the recent guidance published by the International Council on Mining and Metals. Grievance mechanisms are also discussed in the UNGPs, and in particular in Principle 31. This principle relates to non-judicial grievance mechanisms, and it falls under the remedy pillar of the UNGPs. With this understanding of social incidents, risks, and impacts, take a minute to think about the social risks that you've identified for your site. What incidents have eventuated? Were they anticipated in the social impact assessment? Why or why not? Pause the video if you need. When a social incident occurs, sites often launch an investigation into the incident. This investigation would typically involve 7 steps. Step 1 is to define the incident or incidents being investigated. These may need to be redefined multiple times as more information comes to light. Step 2 is to identify the affected stakeholders. And step 3 is to engage with affected stakeholders to understand, from their perspective, how their interests have been affected by the incident. The 4th step is to construct a timeline of what happened, that is, to identify the chain of cause and effect that led to the incident or incidents occurring. Step 5 is about learning from the incident, identifying what steps could have been taken to avoid or mitigate the consequences of the incident. And step 6 is future focused. It's about identifying what possible future consequences could yet occur as a result of the incident or incidents and the steps that should now be taken. The final step is to document all of the above and communicate with company management and other stakeholders to adjust practices in accordance with the investigation's recommendations. How can social incidents be anticipated and monitored? In the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, monitoring social incidents is closely connected with social impact assessment. The social impact assessment will have identified potential impacts or social risks. How these will be managed should be operationalized in a social impact management plan, or SIMP, as described in the social impact assessment module. The SIMP should include risks that the company intends to monitor over the life of the mine, with updates as necessary. A key issue in understanding and responding to social incidents is the tendency of companies to screen out some social incidents from their risk management processes. This issue is the subject of a concept paper published by the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining. In this part of the module, we will provide a brief overview of this issue. Earlier, we discussed how incidents can lead to other incidents, and when investigating incidents, you would construct a timeline of how an incident occurred. This requires tracing the incident backwards to its causes and contributing factors. You would also construct chains of cause and effect looking forwards in order to identify future risks. In addition to forwards and backwards in time, we can also think about the direction of risks and incidents between company and community. This diagram depicts the relationship between the company and the community. Inbound risks are potential incidents that affect the company. They are called inbound because, from the company's perspective, they originate from outside the company with consequences that flow inwards to affect the company. An outbound risk relates to actions of the company that have consequences flowing outwards from the company to affect the community. Of course, this is a simplification. The company and community are not the only actors in this scenario. The broader context needs to be part of this picture. We can combine these two ways of tracing risks and incidents. Let's work through an example. Many operators take over a site from a previous owner. Suppose the previous owner's actions had caused discontent in the community. Suppose, for example, the previous owner had cleared land that was important to a subset of the local community. This can be considered a contextual issue because it related to a different company. But that previous relationship might still have consequences for community members today. That land perhaps would have been used for growing food if the clearing had not occurred. The threat or perceived threat to food security is experienced in the community but not by the company. It is an outbound social risk. Suppose a grievance is then voiced by a community leader. This can be considered a social incident and represents a turning point between inbound and outbound because the raising of the grievance is affecting the company. The grievance could then escalate into protests that disrupts operations, which would be an inbound incident. Take a moment to think about the incident investigation process at your site. When do you typically catch the incident? That is, when do you become aware of a social risk that could become an incident? Pause the video if you need. In our paper, we argue that outbound incidents often do not register as warranting investigation in companies' incident investigation processes. In other words, they are screened out. But failing to screen in outbound incidents could mean that a company reacts too late to prevent escalation. The key point is that incidents occurring in the community should be investigated even if they do not yet affect the company directly. In this module, we've described what social incidents are and their relationship to social risk and social impact assessment and grievance mechanisms. We've described the key steps in investigating and monitoring social incidents, and we've stated how social risks and incidents can be both inbound and outbound. We've also discussed how outbound incidents, those affecting communities, are often screened out of risk management processes. And when this happens, companies can fail to catch incidents before they escalate. This module has provided an overview of understanding and responding to social incidents. Further information is available in the resources listed in the next two slides.